Okay, welcome to my studio. My name is Petrie-George. It's Florida, middle of the afternoon, and this is my studio, aka garage. Today I'm going to show you how to work with miniatures. Specifically, I'm going to do a demonstration on a tiny box, a miniature box, and it will open up and close, and we're going to do a little knob on the top for a lid. Now, in general, when we talk about miniatures, we're going to go through the same thought process as we do when we talk about anything we're going to turn. Okay? We're going to think about the same design, same pleasant curves. Anything you can make large, you can make small. It doesn't take a lot of different tools. A lot of people are scared to do miniature work. They're afraid, oh, I don't have the right tools. Oh, it's too much detail. I can't do anything that small. My lathe is too big. Don't worry about most of that. The only time you're going to really need a different tool is when you're hollowing out the inside of something because it is so small. But I'm going to show you what I prefer to use for that. I'm also going to show you some tips and tricks, how you can use your lathe in other ways than just turning to help you out when you're making miniatures or any other project. Okay, we talked about design. The next thing is our wood. Now, when I do miniatures, I prefer to use a hard wood. Something like Purple Heart, like we're going to use today. Maple works good. Ebony, of course, is great. Anything that is a hardwood you can use for the miniatures. The softer woods will, they tend to chatter a little bit, and you don't have any room to do much sanding when you do miniatures. You really have to do your tool work precise with sharp tools, and you will do a little bit of sanding, but not much. Your tool work does have to be good. Once we know what wood we're going to use, we know what we want to make, we have to ask ourselves, how are we going to hold it? So with this little box, I know I only need maybe the end of a pen blank. When you make your pens, you always have this little piece left over. And what do you do with that piece? A lot of people just throw them away. I don't. I make little boxes. I call these boxes promise boxes or prayer boxes. That's about all they'll hold. And people do like them. And it is a pretty decent seller. So, I know the wood I'm going to use. I have a small piece of it. So I look at how am I going to hold the wood on the lathe. Now, if I were doing something between centers, I could use drive centers in the tailstock. I could use, for this project, I could use a faceplate and then would use a waste block and glue my square on. That's the way I did it to begin with. Or I can use any chuck that will reduce itself down small enough. This one doesn't have the pin jaws. These are called pin jaws. But this will do just fine. I could also, because the stuff is so delicate, I could use a faceplate, and even instead of gluing, I could hot glue it on. But I prefer just to take a regular chuck that'll go down small. I don't even worry about it being squared off. I don't mark my ends. I just stick the piece of wood. Let's make it bigger here. Stick the piece of wood in here. This jaw, this chuck that I'm using right now, happens to be the first chuck that I ever got. It's just an old 4-jaw chuck. I'm not worried. I didn't bring my tailstock up. I'm not overly concerned if it's straight or not. I just want to make sure that it is in there tight. Okay? Now, because it's rectangular, I don't know if you can see or not from the side, because it's rectangular, really only 2 of the jaws are holding it. That's fine for this. you're not going to get a lot of pressure. Okay, talk a little bit about safety before we actually turn on the lathe. You really should make sure that you wear a face shield is best. At least use some safety glasses. If your lathe is loud, you can use earplugs to protect your ears. I generally use a face mask with a respirator in it because I have breathing issues, or I'll use a dust mask. The Dust Be Gone mask is my preference to keep the chips. It's not as bad when I'm turning something small, and you're not going to be able to hear me if I use any of those. So I'm not going to. I'm just going to use some safety glasses over my glasses. They get too irritating, then I'll switch them off. Rings, you really don't want to wear your rings. They can catch on things, so it's best if you don't wear your rings. No long sleeves. The sleeves ends can get caught when this is spinning. Sleeves can get caught. You don't want that. And ponytail. Put your hair, if you have long hair or beard, put a ponytail, tuck it in your shirt if it's a long beard. You do not want anything to get in contact with the spinning lathe that can cause an accident. Now, I'm not going to need my tailstock. I'm going to move that away. I'm going to move my tool rest up. Make sure that this is pretty much as close as I can get it without hitting anything. Okay, I always start with a lower speed, turning it on, and we're going to turn it up until this as high as it'll go. How fast should it go? We're going to turn it as high as it will go without the machine going haywire. We have it right now. This is actually over 4,000. Normally I turn around 2,000. So I'm going to crank this down a little bit. Really no need to have it that fast. Tools. I use only two main tools for doing this box. This is a spindle gouge. It's called a detail tool. It's a spindle gouge that has a steeper grind on it. I use a 35-degree grind for those of you who want to know the degrees and everything. It gets me in every place. I could do this outside with a large tool. It just occurred to me that I did not check where my tool was going to be set at before I turned it on. That's important. Want to make sure my tool rest is set up correctly. So, here we go. First step, just round it off. Quick and easy way to know if it's rounded off or not is if I put it on the top and you hear that bump, 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 bump. It's not rounded yet. Okay, I'm going to take a quick look at it. Alright, I have it round. And I want to put a little knob on the top of it to grab hold of. So I'm just going to use the detail tool. I'm going to go in straight, and then as I get close to where I want, give a little bit of a turn. I'm going to do the tip first, and then I'm going to just round off the top of it. Here we go. You want to watch your proportions when you're doing this. Okay, I've made a couple of nicks in there, so I'm going to go back and smooth that off, get it all the same diameter. Okay, and go back. My proportion is I want my little knob on the top to be about 1/3. So you can see now it's still too big. So I'm going to slowly take some away. So it's about 1/3. Now I'm going to round off the top. Alright, I'm going to check it out now, see if it's pleasing to me. It doesn't have a round enough spot. The proportion is right. I want to go underneath a little bit and give it a little bit better feature. Now let me check it. I think that's much more pleasing. We always have to think about our design, our curves. That's a little bit better. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand the box, the top a little bit, and we're probably not going to touch this again with sandpaper. I'm going to do it real quick. I'm going to turn the speed way down. Okay, so I'm going to sand this. Sometimes when I do these little pieces, I don't turn the speed down as much. But anywhere between 250 and 500 is usually my sanding speed. You shouldn't need to sand too much. For some reason when I did this, my tool work was okay. I had a little bit of tear out. I'm not going to do too much, just touch this up one more time, and we're going to go on. Just make sure it's somewhat acceptable. That's not bad at all. We're going to go with that. Now, the trick here to doing these little boxes, I don't like to use calipers and everything. So there's a way, I learned how to make these little boxes at the Florida Wood Turning Symposium during a hands-on class. And I apologize, I do not remember the gentleman's name. But he showed a technique where we don't have to use calipers and we can be sure that the cover is going to fit, the lid is going to fit into the box. So I'm going to show it to you first on the board here. Right now, we have our tube, and we have a little lid on top. That's what we have. This is the headstock, the chuck that it's coming out of. Alright, what we're going to do is make an indentation where we want our lid to go, and then we're going to leave a little bit of space. We're going to step it in, so once we turn it, it's going to look like this. I'm not the best drawer in the world. Alright, we're going to turn it like that so we have a little indentation, and then we're going to cut. We're going to make our cut right about here. We're going to leave enough for our top, for our lid. We're going to have that piece, and that's going to come off, and we're going to be left on the lathe with a piece like this. this little bit that we left here is going to show us exactly where to cut, where to turn, cut in, how to hollow out, so we know exactly where our lid will fit without having to do any measurements. So let's go back and we'll do this. So to part the first little bit, you can use, I have 3 parting tools. I have the standard one that comes into your kits when you buy a spindle gouge kit, okay? I have one of the standard narrow parting tools. And I have one that a friend made me that is really quite thin, maybe a 32nd of an inch here. It's really thin. The one I'm going to use to start with, because I want it wider than I'm going to actually cut, I'm going to use the big one. Oh, got to speed this back up here. When you're doing smaller pieces, your speed has to be much higher because what's spinning is in the middle. We're about 27 RPMs now. That's normally what I turn at. The more away you get from your project, then the faster it's going to turn. You're going to have to slow down your speed. The further you're in, the smaller diameter, then the higher the speed you need. Hope you understood that. At the end, we'll have some questions if you don't. I'm just going to go slightly a little bit bigger, not much. Okay, so what we have is that indent, like I showed you. Yeah, you can see it later. That indent, and now I'm going to part it, leaving part of it so I can see where the lid should go, and part of it will be attached to the lid so it stays in place. When you part these little pieces, you're going to drop them. You can try and catch it. I'm not very good at that, so I use a box to catch the piece as it falls off. I don't lose it that way. If you lose it in your shavings, let me tell you, these things are hard to find. Now, if you can see, there's a little nub on there. I'm going to show you later how to clean that up. A little trick to it. We'll just put it on top here for now. And we'll set this aside. We don't need it. Now, this is where we're gonna be hollowing out the inside. So I need to change my tool rest. And this is where you have to have a miniature tool. If you don't have them, you can make them out of Allen wrenches, screwdrivers. I've seen them done out of screwdrivers. You're not talking a lot of pressure when you do boxes like this, so it's not real critical what you're using, the steel that you're using. What I like to use on larger ones is a Bedan tool. So what I did was I took an old round nose scraper, and made it into a Bedan tool. So it's straight across. I like these boxes to have a straight bottom. If I want a curved bottom in the box, I use a round nose scraper. So I'm going to set my rest up. It's got to come down just a tiny bit. And I went down too far. See how tiny it needed to go? want it to line up on about center so that it can take away the little nib in the bottom. Okay. Now remember, I've got that little edge there, so I'm going to cut in just aside from that. Okay, I just went, not quite, I still have a little edge there. So I took that edge off, just making sure it's smooth on the bottom. Now let's see how deep we are here. We got a little ways more we can go. So I'm going to go just a little bit further. Let's see how we are now. You know, I like that because it'll leave me a little room to cut off on the bottom. Now, if I'm going to sand the inside, and I usually sand it just a tiny bit, no one can really feel in there, what I do is just tear a really small piece, fold the end, that'll kind of get inside and on the bottom. Let me turn my speed down. Just do a tiny bit. You don't really want to make sure that you don't do too much on the inside, the side, because you want your lid to fit. Which I didn't check my lid. I'm going to have to check that. I just assumed I did it correctly. I've been wrong before. So let's stop this and see how our lid fits. It fits really good. You want it loose. You don't want it to, you want it loose, but so it looks like it fits. You don't want it so tight that you got to work to get it off. This one here, you can hear a little pop when I take it off. That's really too tight. We want it to be a little looser than that. Now, next step is to part this off. Again, I'm going to use my thinnest parting tool. Get this in place. Always check by hand and make sure that your tool rest doesn't hit any part of your piece. And we're going to speed this up again. Turn it on. Actually, I know I want to go pretty high, so I'm going to jump it up. Okay, I jumped it up to 2,000. That should be fine for this. Alright, then remember my little box underneath here. We do not want to look all over the floor for it in those shavings. And it falls right into the box. Shut it off. Okay, looks good. But again, got a little nib on the bottom here. We got to take care of that. So here's where we get to the little tricks. Okay, we're back. I've got a little chuck that normally you put a drill bit in. Jacob's chuck, I believe they're called. I put one of the sanding discs on it that a lot of people put on their drills to sand to the big stuff. I put this on there. I'm going to slow down my speed. And voila, it becomes a disc sander for me. I'm going to use this little piece. I just hold it by my hand and sand the little nub off. Make it nice and flat. Our lid is now finished. With this bottom, hold it up there, sand it nice and flat, and it takes care of that little nub on there. All better. Sits there. Maybe we got to do a little more to this one. Now that feels better. Put the top on, and we're all done sanding, and our little nubs are gone. Now, another trick. Well, actually, let me tell you that you can, instead of doing a knob on the top, you can leave it flat on the top and put a little design on there with a texturing tool. As far as finishing these off, you can spray them with lacquer. You can, I usually just paint a little lacquer on it, and then I might take a little wax and put it over top of it, rub it in. They're real small. There's not a lot you don't really need to have them really shiny. And you don't want a lot of buildup on it. You want something that's just going to soak in, give it a finish. You could use tung oil. That would be great. Anything like that. Now, let me just check. We talked about sanding, turning your lathe into a sander. Also, you can turn your lathe into a Dremel tool. Again, a Jacob's chuck. Put it in here. Open it up, and you can put in any of your Dremel tools, gadgets that you have. You can stick them in there and turn that on. Even the small ones, I've used the tiny ones. The little fruit bowl that I used to get some of the edge on my bananas, I used one of these. I'll just turn this one, I'll put this one in. Turn it in, turn it on, and of course raise your speed. With my miniature work, if I have to do any additional carving on it, I have a little dental tool. I do usually use this. With the last miniature fruit bowl, the one that's about the size of a quarter, I didn't want to, it was later at night when I was working on it, and I did not want to turn the compressor on. That would have bothered my husband, so I tried this, and this worked. So if you don't have to bother getting a whole dental tool set, you don't have to worry about buying the most expensive Dremel tool. You can turn your lathe into a Dremel tool. Glue. When I do miniature work, a lot of times I need to glue pieces in. With the fruit, I had to glue the stems into the apples. So I normally use the gel type super glue with a very, very fine tip. You can get a real small tip on the Star Bond glues. They'll send you them, and that is the most precise thing I've found. I also, in order to drill those tools, use this Dremel chuck, and you can get jeweler tools, jeweler drill bits. If you're doing real tiny stuff, like I had to drill in the little apples, I had to drill holes for the stems to go in. These are sizes number 61 to 80. We're talking really miniature drill bits. But they still work. They'll go right in here, or I can put my piece in here, and I can just put the drill bit on a handle, or even with my fingers. When I did the apples, I put the apples in this little holding device, and I had hot glued on the side of the apple just to keep the apple in place, and then I held the drill bit with my hand and just put a teeny tiny hole in there. It was on low speed when I did it. You don't have to go very far. It was quite easy to do. When you're doing the gluing, when you're doing anything that's that small, you need to have some type of a magnification. I use this attached right to my table wherever I'm doing the work. This I can even attach to my lathe if I want to. You can also get the glasses that they're much cheaper, that have the little magnifying lenses in them that goes on your head. You can get those, but you usually are going to have to magnify it or you'll make mistakes, especially if you have shaky hands like I do. And the last thing is two things. Last two things. One is when you're doing really miniature stuff, sometimes you need to support your piece. In order to make the grapes in the fruit bowl, I had little tiny pieces of Purple Heart, and what you do is you put your hand behind the piece of wood while you're not touching your chuck, and you will give it support while you are cutting it. So you're really cutting with one hand then and kind of supporting with one hand. It is fine. You're not going to lose control or anything. When you sign, one other thing that I didn't tell you is when I do the really tiny, like the grapes, I use a collet chuck system where I just has a little hole, and it goes in to a chuck holder, goes in here. Pretty simple. You put whatever size collet you need, put it in there, get it close to the size, put your piece of wood in the hole, and then put it on the lathe like that. The last thing is signing your work. When you've got work this tiny, how are you going to sign it? Work this small, I use the permanent ink pens. They're Indian ink or something like that. And I use a symbol. If you look at the board, I use a symbol, a D overlapped with a P. And that I can write really small. So I use that on all my work, whether it be large or small. And that is kind of my signature for any of my artwork. And if I do certificates of authenticity, that is on there. It's written that my work will have that mark on it, big or small. Now we'll go to any questions. And thank you for watching.